If you follow Battlefield 2042, then you might be aware that Update 5.1 released earlier this week. From a content perspective, this was a fairly light update, but there was one portion of the notes that really stuck out to me. There is a whole section dedicated to improvements to Hazard Zone. The mode that was announced a long time ago that would no longer be receiving support actually got a meaningful amount of attention. Now, I've been pretty outspoken that I think Hazard Zone had a lot of wasted potential. I even did a whole video at the beginning of the year listing the changes I would make to make the mode more appealing. I'll link it in the corner and in the description if you want to watch that, but I stand by most of the things that I said then. DICE definitely took a very different direction from what I described in my video, but the thing that gets me scratching my head, the thing that really makes me think about this enough to make my first video in over 5 weeks, is just asking why. Why make these changes? Why is a mode that DICE announced they were through with, they admitted defeat, they gave up on it? Why is it now getting a slew of new changes? And looking through these changes, the major thrust of this is not only giving players more of a reason to play Hazard Zone through hefty XP gains, but it's definitely geared more toward new players to the game. Most players who have everything unlocked don't need the XP anymore, so for someone like me, that's not really a big draw, though I do appreciate making the games quicker to start and easier to get going, which is also a big boon for new players. And not only have they done these changes, they've also provided a small list of known issues that will be addressed in a future update. Another promised update to improve Hazard Zone. As soon as I initially read those patch notes, I was just really consumed by this decision and what it meant. Personally, I actually think Hazard Zone is still pretty fun. Even diving back into it right after Update 5.1 dropped, while there's definitely now a lack of stakes and tension since you don't lose anything by failing to extract, the general BR style of engagements on these maps still mostly feels really fun. And I still like how the data drives, being the only real objectives on the map, force squads to eventually converge on each other and engage. And not just engage in a sporadic team deathmatch style, but around an objective that they both want. That said, the gameplay experience is nearly identical to the way it was before, though you can take in your own loadouts now, so new players won't have such a barrier to entry. Again, another major change to make things easier on new players. So why would DICE want to make this game mode more attractive for new players? Why would they come back to it after giving up on it in the past? What has changed from then until now that makes them think that Hazard Zone is worth the development time and effort? Of course, this is quite the long shot, but I wonder if now that the main game is in a mostly fine state, though lacking a bit of content, is DICE considering reviving the mode? Do they now have enough development time to dedicate to something like Hazard Zone? And honestly, part of me, probably the more optimistic part of me, wants to say that they are at least dipping their toes in. By making a bit of a spectacle about these Hazard Zone changes, I get the feeling that the developers might be trying to gauge interest in renewed support for Hazard Zone. Not just for how it exists now within 2042, but to use it as a testing ground for future games. It makes me think of the first Warzone, where in the last year or so of the game's lifecycle, Raven Software were making tons of changes to the game, some seemingly half-baked and many of them temporary, in what, in retrospect, was clearly a test for features we see now in Warzone 2. Probably the most prominent example was Iron Trials, which was basically a massive test for a potential ranked mode with alternative rule sets, something that is now present in Warzone 2. So to extend that to DICE in Battlefield 2042, we know that there is likely some kind of Battlefield BR or extraction experience on the horizon over the next couple of years. So as developers, I can see the tremendous incentive from a development perspective of using Hazard Zone as a testing ground. Ideas that might be getting floated for a standalone extraction title could be implemented into Hazard Zone, and then community managers could gather feedback from their traditional channels like social media and surveys. Things like changes to gunplay and specialist balance, or even things like alternative objectives on the map, are all things I could see DICE wanting to test in Hazard Zone. But even if we just look at Battlefield 2042 as a whole, as it stands now, there's been a rising sentiment that the game feels stale in Season 5, and to a degree, I feel the same. End of the day, even adding things like new maps, gadgets, weapons, and vehicles will only do so much to revive interest. While the real way to keep players interested would be, in my opinion, to offer other ways to play Battlefield outside of the few traditional modes that have been around for over a decade. Of course, this is the whole point of Battlefield Portal, but even that could be a bit limited by the tools the community has available to them. By making Hazard Zone a thriving, well-supported mode, there's a completely different way to experience the core gameplay elements, many of which are actually better suited to the specialist design in the game. If they could couple that with things like making Shutdown a permanent addition to the game, I think a lot of complaints about being stale would get alleviated. Either way, I'll be keeping a very close eye on Hazard Zone and the changes it receives in future updates. It was always so crazy to me that one of the most marketed aspects of this game was dropped so early on without much of an attempt to flesh it out. Anyway, that does it for me, and I want to hear from all of you. Have any of you played Hazard Zone recently? What do you think of the mode? And are these changes possibly indicative of DICE renewing support? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to talk about it. With that, leave a like or a dislike, and I'll see you all in the next video.